Why does it sometimes take a second try to fully communicate with someone? What does it take to construct an album on your own? How does one contextualize their diverse interests into one cohesive vision? When should peace be prioritized within the creative process? This cosmic transmission comes from Chameleon, a shape-shifting prodigy from Dublin, Ireland. Here, he discusses the creation of his debut album, Call Me Twice.
God, I don't know when the beginning of the album is. I think probably the idea just started to arise from like feeling a bit lost with doing singles and having come off the back of like producing for other people primarily and wanting to kind of develop a sound that I liked and that I felt was unique. And that with like a sprinkle of perfectionism and ego kind of brought the idea of making an album up, I think. Yeah.
So it came sort of from this desire to refine your own creative voice.
Yeah, I think it just came from like actually listening to myself and like listening to what I really wanted to do with music and what I like love listening to from other artists, which is albums. And it's just like long form like expression and long form exploration of like maybe a singular idea, which is kind of like concept albums and stuff like that I always enjoyed listening to growing up. And I also just never really felt that I was able to properly express myself in one song. And just always had and have like the instinct to flesh something out and like put a story in it. I think maybe that also comes from like the love of like film and TV, of just like wanting to like watch a character develop over time rather than just like a snapshot. Although now I feel like it's maybe a little bit different. I'm maybe a little bit more interested in snapshots and in exploring that. But yeah, that's where it came from.
Amazing. Because that's something I picked up on. Obviously there's bits of media spliced into the album. And because I know you, I knew that was another major area of your life that was bleeding into this.
Yeah.
And I even remember before you went down to Donegal to start working on everything, you were showing me some of the conceptualization for the album, and it was very like film in its format. Like there was as much imagery as there was lyrics or sounds.
Yeah, true. I think it was just like combining two skills and two loves. That was like the only thing that made sense for me anyway, because like film was my first love, and I was always like making films before I was making songs. So that language was more fluent to me, I suppose, than creating an album or a project that was a lot more loose and maybe tied together by sonics more than by narrative. But yeah,
it's interesting. I mean, because I think as someone who's been listening to your music even before Chameleon began, and especially going down to stay with you in Donegal and experiencing the beginnings of this whole new creative phase, and even from the early examples that you were showing me then, I could already hear a new and really refined voice at the core of the music. But was there a conscious moment that you were like, okay, I'm gonna craft a specific artistic voice for Chameleon?
Yeah.
Okay.
I think that definitely makes sense, and it was also another reason why making an album made sense at the time, because I was making a lot of different sounding stuff and I just couldn't get away from that. Like I always wondered how artists could make so many songs that were like sonically very similar and lyrically very similar and generically by way of genre I'm talking about very similar, but like that just never came naturally to me, and I always found myself making like a pop song one day or a rock song the next day, or like something a bit more punky or something a bit more electronic, and then I would just have all these songs that just didn't sonically make sense together. And so what I kind of realized is like, that's a part of me that isn't going to change right now, because that's my creative instinct, is to do that. So how do I work what I can control around that to move for that, so that like it contextualizes these different songs and makes them make sense together. And like the way that it made sense to do that was, one, in an album, two, to make it narrative so that the songs link together by story, and by sound effects as well, by world building with like sound design. And that was kind of my way of, that was like my get out of jail card, really, I suppose, is that like it gave me a way to like circumvent that restriction, or at least restriction in my head, that I thought it was a restriction, but I don't ultimately think it is. But I do think maybe in terms of trying to sell your music, it's certainly harder to sell a song of a different genre to the same people as the same artist every time you're putting out something new. And I think the skill to like make songs that work together and sound a lot more similar while also not being boring or like compromising what I understand to be my image and my voice is something that I only could have like arrived at with experience, and the experience of doing the album, and also just like sharpening your instincts.
Yeah, because that's definitely a big part of the work, I would say, as an artist, especially in the beginning of discovering who you are and what you want to be creatively. And I relate to that with what I'm doing, because I got to a point where I was like, and as you say, it's a point where you're like, okay, this is how my brain works. I'm really interested in all this diverse stuff, these different mediums, and that's not going to change. So I need to build some sort of custom framework for my instincts, which can then, contextualize them all under this one cohesive goal. And that does obviously require a lot of hard introspection, but as you get to a place where you can experiment in these different ways and you can be fully yourself in what you're making, without worrying so much that you're not just committing to one thing, but that it's all feeding some sort of larger intentional a vision. And that's one thing about your album, the way it's this whole linking narrative. Like, again, it's very much like a film where it can go off and have these moments of humor or horror or drama, because there's this story or this character that's carrying you through it all. And so do you think, with all that in mind, do you think changing your name was a big help?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. I needed to separate from myself, also just because I was already putting out music under my own name. So I think having a different name just like completely freed me up to not really worry about, or to just give me a little bit more control over like what I could present as me under my own name that was maybe more direct and more vulnerable, and then also just allow me to put out a song like The Ransom, which maybe is specifically a metaphor for something else and is a character in a different situation, which like if it did just come out under my own name might not be as like easily understood by the listener, I suppose.
And so if you sat down now with that version of you that made that change, that made that decision to begin this, creative journey as Chameleon, and you showed him this album, what do you think his reaction would be?
I think he'd be impressed. I think he'd probably be like, why does it take so long? Because honestly, it did take so long. Like, just to get this like over the finish line, and to also just to get it out. And that was just one of the things as well, which was a huge learning curve for like doing an album, especially on your own, and like not having a band or like people around you that are as invested in it as you, is very, very taxing. But no, I definitely think that like that person that created Chameleon would be very proud of this project.
It's great.
Yeah.
And I suppose an add-on to that question would be, if you were to then lay out the full reality of the ups and downs of going about creating this whole album, do you think excitement would be more the feeling that he would have, or do you think it would be terror?
Oh, probably terror, yeah. Yeah, probably. Probably, yeah. But I think that's why the naivety at the time was important, I think, to even just starting, like, and not and just like committing to it. And like there were points along the way that I could have abandoned this project and just gone back to something that was easier. And even after the first half of the album came out, like I was also faced with the decision to not release the second half right now and just start going off and doing singles and more stuff. And it didn't actually like make sense to put out the second half in terms of the numbers. But I had to do it. Like I owed it to myself to see it through.
And so talk about the splitting of it into two parts.
I mean, the reasoning primarily was like, it's very hard to convince people to listen to a full album from a new artist that they're not familiar with. It also, releasing it in two parts gives you kind of two bullets in the gun, I suppose, and the opportunity to learn from your first bullet. So I think it definitely did make sense. However, I think having got to the point now where the second EP is just about to come out, and like the amount of time that it's taken to get there, I think I would have gone back and just released the album as full, because I just really have felt limited by not being able to like mentally and emotionally move on from this project yet. And I think I really would have loved the last like year to just completely, it's like move forward and move past it. And I think ultimately what I wanted is that at the end of this to just be an album there, which is going to be the case. It's not going to be part one and part two anymore when it comes out. It's all going to be in one album. So anyone who comes to the Chameleon page like after it comes out will have no idea that it was part one or part two. It'll just be the album, which is always what I wanted. But I think, yeah, I would have just thrown it out and just kind of let it speak for itself and move on. But that was the reason.
Yeah, I think it's a great idea. I mean, I wouldn't be surprised if at least one person has seen you do it and is going to try it for themselves. But I also completely resonate with the idea of, like you say, I should have finished this and moved on. And that the two bullets in the gun is great, but the more you drag something out, the more you change as a person.
Yeah.
And so it becomes hard to work on it with the same mindset as when you began. But I do think the way you've constructed this, the second part of the album is going to be very much like a sequel to something, before they merge into this unified thing, which I think is a very unique experience for an audience when it comes to music.
I think that the sequel thing, that also was a big part of the decision. Like it made sense to do it. It wasn't really just that it was, well, it makes sense for like the industry side of things and all that. Like I wouldn't have made that decision if I didn't feel like there was value to it being in two parts as well. And there is value, and like that idea of a sequel and like waiting for the next part is like so linked with like film and TV as well. So that was
yeah. I also think decisions like that, it's weird because depending on the audience you have in that moment, it sort of dictates what you think of the idea.
Yeah.
Because it could be a truly great idea, but when there's no real response to it or like a place for it to land, it's hard to, like I have it with some of the stuff I make, and it's like, that's a great idea for me if I was 50 and at the top of my game.
yeah. That makes, you're so right. Yeah.
So I think it's a really weird aspect of ideas that takes a while to fully accept.
I think I knew as well that like, I knew that my ideas were good for this project, and I still do. And what I also had an instinct about, and it has really revealed itself, is also just that like people need to trust you as an artist before these types of ideas really land, and like before they're like open to buying into them, literally buying into them. But also at the same time I was like, I'm actually fine with that, because I have trust that I'll build that trust with an audience over time, and that project will still exist to come back to when that trust is made, that it'll still have hopefully an impact, and like, yeah, it's just sitting there waiting for that.
Yeah, incredible. And so tell me about the title, Call Me Twice, because it seems very intentional in the way that it's referencing the two-parter aspect of the album.
Yeah, it's funny that it referenced the two-parter. That was kind of just like a happy accident, like a lot of kind of things on this project, and just in creative things in general. But the title came from the themes in the project, which the main theme is like communication between this protagonist and people in his life, be it family, romantic relationships, friendships, the audience, the rest of the world, whatever. And the idea of like Call Me Twice, kind of literally, I just liked because at the time I had this thing with my phone where like if you called me for the first time, it wouldn't ring for some reason. And people would always get annoyed with me about that because they'd always have to ring me twice essentially. But I just thought that idea was kind of cool in the sense that as a person throughout the process of this album, I was very insular and very shut off, but I also felt that I was very willing to be open if I felt that someone actually cared. And I think a lot of that came from like feeling like, well, no one actually really cares. I'm not going to like offer vulnerability to people, and I'm not going to, look for help or seek for help, but ultimately wanted people to listen and wanted people to take a genuine interest. So like, it was kind of just that idea that if you knock twice or if you call twice, I'm going to pick up on the second call. And yet like phones, the ringing of phones and the ignoring of calls as well, can kind of be heard throughout this album. And the final moment of the album is someone picking up, but we can get into more of that later.
Yeah. I think it's funny just on that point of having faith that an audience will find their own way to a great idea. When I was listening to the first half of the album again, the Call Me Twice Part 1, and I was sitting out in my garden, a memory of that problem you had with your phone just like hit me.
No way.
Yeah, and I was like, and even in that moment, I was like, that's the exact experience that I would assume you would hope for.
Yeah,
like,
exactly, yeah.
Which is like, it works on both an obvious and a much deeper and personal level. And yeah, it just really inspired me because that's what you want as an artist, and it was happening to me via you. That thing of just sitting down, and for no other reason than just exposing myself to the art again, was I like hit with an extra level of resonation with the piece.
Yeah.
And I suppose, when you make stuff yourself, you're always thinking about that feeling or hoping that your audience will have that experience with something you create. And it's weird because it's like that's success, but I'm having it privately and it's your success. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah, that's funny, yeah.
And yet, you never really know that unless, like I'm telling you now because we're having this conversation, but it's so hard to often be aware that your idea is actually having an impact.
That's the gift, though, I think, like, side of music is that, like, doing those things which, like, might never be picked up on by anyone, but just doing it as, like, gifts to, like, the future, as, like, I'm not going to know if you get this or not, but if you do, you're going to feel a little bit more special, and like I get a little bit more from it, and like it's worth taking a little bit of extra time to just like add those things in and work on the layers of the art, I suppose. But it gets a lot harder to do those things, just with pressures of time and money and just like the current climate, I suppose.
Yeah.
But
you're right. It's worth it.
Yeah.
Definitely. That's a good way to put it. And it's important to keep reminding yourself of that because, like, even when you're completely alone in a room, it still feels worth it somehow. I suppose that's like leaning into the spiritual side of things as well,
Yeah,
you know?
absolutely, yeah.
But it also leads me to another point just on that, which is at the beginning of all this, we've mentioned it already, but you stayed alone in a cabin down in Donegal, moved all your instruments down there. And so I was curious to ask, how important was isolating yourself at the beginning of a project like this?
Yeah, I think very important for a project like this. I think like because it was the intention behind it was to really like turn inward and like just like listen very acutely to um myself and like what I like and try and figure out what I like. Um it was so important to just remove distractions and voices. Because when you're comfortable and you're living around friends and family and there's always reasons to see people or to distract yourself with noise or like music that's maybe a little bit more vapid or is just getting you through the day, then it's very hard to like quieten yourself and like actually tune into what you like, because like ultimately so many times being at home I would be writing stuff and just be so dissatisfied with it because I just wanted to like copy something else, or I just wanted to like satisfy something very temporary like inside myself. And yeah, I think just I always knew that I wanted to be in the country. I love being in the country, and I always find being around nature is like one of the biggest sources of inspiration for me, definitely, and just being somewhere quiet. And yeah, it was really just about removing distractions. But like ultimately at this point, having done that album and like where I'm kind of at now with music, is that I want to bring more people in and like collaborate a little bit more and listen outwardly a little bit more. But that's because now I feel like I have much deeper understanding of what I like, and now I don't feel as vulnerable to influence negatively, I suppose. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think you've earned that position because it's sort of, it's a rite of passage that everyone like has to go through, or everyone should try and go through, which is some kind of period of deep introspection, or meditation, you know, like
Yeah.
when you're making that transition from college into career, whether you're classifying yourself as an artist or not, it's that attempt to like create a quiet space where you can just sit with your thoughts for a while,
Yeah.
which is a really hard thing to do, but it's something that can only benefit your life in the long run.
Yeah.
And I wonder how common that is. Like, how many artists begin their journey with like a quiet and isolated period because they're in the process, like you describe, of trying to find their voice, which is such an internal thing, you know?
But I think like, yeah, like even just what you're saying about like meditating or just like creating that like space to do nothing is like, that was like one of the biggest things that I learned from doing the album, but specifically doing the album in Donegal was just like, you can't like strong arm creativity. Like you cannot force it. You can like to an extent where like you're maybe treating it almost like you're a craftsman, but like not where you're an artist more so. Like if you're really trying to communicate something personal, you literally just create a space and have faith that something will just like arise from that. It's like a field. You're just like tending to a field and just like allowing the possibility for like crops to go, I suppose.
Yeah, beautiful. And it's something you can't fully appreciate until you try and do it yourself, you know?
Yeah.
Like most things, I guess. So sort of just on that notion of allowing things to arise naturally, talk to me about the art for the album cover and how you approach that part of the creative process.
Yeah, it's a funny one because that was kind of one of the areas of this process which I was disappointed by. And I'll just be honest about that. Like, I think it was also a learning curve because it kind of, I had so much visual information in my head for this project, and trying to put it into one image I just found impossible to do. And I just kind of reached a point where I realized that I'm not there yet in terms of visually communicating this music or music in general. And my skills are not there yet. And that's fine. And I think I was very hard on myself for a long time that like, oh, this is like the missing piece of the puzzle that I just didn't get right. And like, this is going to let down the whole project now. And like, I haven't like had some time to like step back and be like, it's fine. Like, it's fine that one area of it maybe didn't live up to your expectations. Like that has to be okay. And sorry, to preface this, I'm talking about the artwork for the first half of the EP, because the artwork that we since did, which I did with an artist called Serena Devereaux, who's amazing. I'm really happy with that. And that also is just like an example of like learning from the first time and just being able to like develop on those skills. So the artwork that is going to come out with this whole album, I love. I think it's great. But yeah, the first image for the first half of the EP was kind of just put in so that this project could come out. And like the idea was still thought through, and like the vibe that I wanted to kind of get of like a character, specifically like that time of evening, like the blue hour kind of time was one of the big through lines through this project. So I knew I wanted that, and then this kind of feeling of like crossing from an urban space to a natural space was also something in it, and I thought that was kind of well communicated by like those pylons. And so yeah, I was just like, you know what, that's going to do for now, and we'll come back to it. But I was kind of like, even we're doing like revised covers for like the singles also, because like the single covers were they weren't placeholders, but again, they were just like, I just didn't have the ability or the skill to do what I wanted, I suppose. And I also, like in doing the revised covers, that's kind of something which I found to be kind of fun, is that like that's also something that you can play with after the fact. Like the songs are going to exist. You can't go back into Spotify and replace an audio with something else. Like that's just not possible. But you actually can change the covers, and I'm just kind of seeing it as like a more free-flowing process of like updating, and if I like coming with a more fully fleshed idea further down the line is okay, if it means that I can get out the music now, I suppose.
Yeah. I think that's really interesting. I think maybe it could be a compliment to the music in a way, because the music, which is the craft that you've been most focused on and like going to the gym for essentially, has reached such a distinct standard for you that it's surpassing your skill levels in other areas, maybe.
Yeah.
And so it's demanding more than you can give in those areas at the moment. But would you say there's a certain vibe, like visually, that you feel might work best with the sound that you've cultivated for Chameleon, or does it just completely depend on the music?
No, I don't think there's a vibe. I think it does depend on the music, definitely. And the music that I'm writing now is going to bring up new things. But I think like my relationship with, or at least I hope to think, because I haven't actually done anything past this project that's come out, I think I'm definitely changing my approach to visuals, in that like I want to just be creating more freely and more consistently, and with more of an acceptance of imperfections. And just like so many times on this process, I've been like struggling with perfectionism, and like every time I just come back to the fact that like I am happiest when I'm like reconnecting with like a childlike sense of creation and play, and like making artworks and videos was because it was like my first love and like first kind of creative output as a young person, as a child and as a teenager and as a young person. That's what makes sense to me. And like I just want to, I'm again, it's about bringing faith back into it and being like, I'm gonna have faith that like leaning more into that and just working more consistently and putting things out more consistently is in the long term going to be more beneficial, rather than thinking about it so much in advance and then ultimately ending up with the artwork for Contextualise Part 1, which I'm just like, had I just done stuff more consistently and made stuff more consistently and not thought about it, I probably would have got somewhere quicker than I would have liked. Yeah.
And what do you think, what are the elements of the final album cover art that you think you're resonating with, or that make you like it so much?
I think a lot of it actually came from being able to work with someone else and just like being able to like take the pressure off of having to be in control of every medium. And I think I've learned about myself that my strengths perhaps are a little bit stronger as a responder to someone else's ideas, and like an edit, maybe not an editor fully, but like just that like someone presented me with a creative idea is what I need to like bounce off and create something new, rather than coming up with something new. So working with like someone like Serena, where I found her art, I found a style of art that she was excited about and working on, and then being able to have conversations with her where she was like, well, I like this aspect of this software and I want to explore it more. And we did it for like plants. She did it for plants for a degree show. And that kind of, because it was like playing with like the natural world, but like warping it in a digital space, I was like, wow, that's really cool. That resonates with me because of a lot of the stuff that I was exploring in this project. And we were able to both bring things to the table, which ultimately just ended up with something that I loved, but also I felt took the pressure off a little bit because it wasn't all my idea. And that's also something which I found to be the case, that when you can share the responsibility of an idea, you end up being more satisfied with it a lot of the time, I've found. Yeah.
That's really interesting. Yeah. I also think maybe you're such a good editor because you've done all this work to become, you know, like the perfect answering machine.
Yeah.
In some sense for this entity and for this voice that is Chameleon.
Yeah, true.
And working with other people, like collaborating with other people, is just a quicker version in some sense of what you're already doing, because you're getting way more input and ideas that you can then sort through with a much more refined vision. And, you know, you're able to, like, you're like an AI, but, you know,
No, exactly.
for this project,
yeah.
for this voice, for this artist. Like,
Yeah, that's well put. Yeah.
but yeah, that does also kind of lead us on to talking about producing, because you've always produced your own stuff and you produce for other people.
Yeah.
Where are you at with that side of things now after the experience of doing the album?
I'm definitely enjoying producing for people again. I definitely think another reason to do the album was just that I wanted to actually just set aside some time to make my own stuff. But yeah, I've been producing for some people in London, and I've been really enjoying it. I've also really been enjoying producing for myself and Kaki and Karsten's kind of trio thing that's going on, because that's kind of like a happy medium where I can take the producer seat but also get to input like my own kind of artistic stamp as well. But yeah, producing for the people, having done the album, is a lot more fun, and I feel a lot more confident like walking into a session, knowing like what my strengths are and what I enjoy, basically. Yeah.
Do you find that you're bringing some of the sonic DNA that you've cultivated with this album into working with other people, or are you trying to just get the best out of that artist?
Yeah, definitely. I'm definitely bringing a lot from like this project into other people's stuff. Every artist is different though. It's like some people come with a full idea of what they want. Some people just have lyrics or whatever. Like, so it definitely does vary, but it is definitely an opportunity for me to not only like practice different genres, but also experiment with like like some elements that are right up my alley, how they might work with like elements that aren't necessarily, that someone else is bringing in and saying, I want a synth sound that sounds like this from this song. And I'm like, okay, cool. I also want it to sound good, and this might not necessarily be my thing. So how do I make this work with this? And sometimes it works and like creates just like an alchemy that I couldn't have ever really got to if it was just me in the room, because I wouldn't have made that choice.
It sounds like producing for other people, like you were saying earlier, it gives you an opportunity to experiment in genre without it having to be coming directly from you or your brand.
100%.
You know?
Yeah, that's so much of it as well. It's just like, sometimes I do just want to write a pop song, or I do just want to write like a folk song and know that it will be finished. And it's not that I'm using other people as vessels to do that, but like they usually trust me and give me the opportunity to like just go with that in a session.
Yeah.
So it really is the best of both worlds to be able to do that, and I'm very fortunate to be able to do that just because I produce.
Yeah, amazing. I suppose one final thing I wanted to touch on just before we get into listening to the album is just on the concept of albums themselves as these, you know, pieces of art, and how people these days engage with something like that in the long form. What do you expect from releasing something like this project? Do you think like most people will dive in and experience the full thing like you've intended, or have you noticed that it's always just like a mix, like some do, some don't?
It's going to be a mix. 100% it's going to be a mix. Yeah, I mean, like obviously my hope is that people will listen to it fully through, and I do think I have designed it well in a way that like, if you are that way inclined and you do start from the start, I do feel like it'll hold your attention. Maybe not for the whole way to the end. Like it's asking a lot, and it's also, there's a lot of different genres, and like it's very unlikely that like there's going to be a lot of people that like all of them in the way that I do. But that's fine. And I've definitely like done a lot of work to detach myself healthily from like the outcome. Especially after the first EP, because like the first EP coming out was like followed by just like a big dip in confidence, and like it was literally just like I took like my first breath after doing like a kilometer sprint. Like it was just like everything just kind of set in at that point once I wasn't kind of moving on automatic. And it took a lot out of me to do that and to give that much to it. And it just made me realize that I want to be happy. I actually want to just be like, I want like my creativity and my music to be serving me in a way that is like actually improving my life, not just like destroying it for other people's sake, because I don't think that's necessary. Like I think absolutely suffering is important, and sacrifice and hard work, effort, they're all necessary in a creative process, but like disappointment and sadness are definitely not welcome. Like I think it's you should really be striving for peace.
Yeah, well said. But so what would you say, what lessons have come from that part of the experience? Like, have you thought about things that maybe have since helped diminish the dip as you describe it?
Yeah, I think it's like I've just completely had to like turn my focus away from the finished product and just into like the present moment. And that just goes back to meditation as well, and just like finding peace in the present moment. And like doing that album like was really hard, and while I do think necessary in the long run, it didn't bring me any peace throughout the process. Like, I'm very happy to have done it, but the process of doing it was like almost self-harm. Like it was just like a way of kind of beating myself down, and like I didn't approach it in a healthy way. So like ultimately it wasn't it was just adding a lot of stress to my life. And then the reason that I kept going is because I felt like once I get to the end and once I finish it, it'll all have been worth it. I'll look back and I'll realize that the suffering was worth it. And like ultimately the project came out and like that didn't happen, and I just felt shit. And like I just realized, wow, okay, so I feel shit after and I feel shit during. So what am I doing again? Like what's my job? But that was it. That was a big wake-up call, and it was a very, very necessary one as well. And I do actually believe that it has instilled a change in me to like be more attuned to what is like sparking joy, and like what's fun and what makes me feel like a kid when I'm doing it. And like just like understanding that like the process is the point, which is something that we've talked about and you talk about a lot as well. Yeah, I just like detaching yourself from the outcome. And like now looking back on the project, I love it. And like I had to really, it took a long time to get there, to be honest. But yeah, I just learned a lot from doing that.